Item 3, new business, comprehensive plan update, parks and recreation element. And Carol Ohlfs, please. Hi, Carol.
Hi, good evening, Carol. Just start sharing my screen here. All right. Okay, can you see it? Excellent. Okay, well, thanks for having me tonight. This next portion of the agenda will be a briefing on the proposed Parks and Recreation Element Comp Plan amendments. I'm Carol Ohlfs. I'm a principal park planner from the Parks and Recreation Division of the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. This presentation focuses on providing an overview of the PRE amendments, summarizing public comments, and answering any questions and noting feedback from the commissioners. This brief presentation will go over the information provided in the staff report, starting with the background, an overview of the proposed amendments, and the public participation summary. Then we'll review the policy table where the parks element has 9 goals, one of which is new. There are 16 objectives, 8 are new, and 57 policies, 26 are new. Lastly, I'll review the PRE narrative document, which has been reorganized for this comp plan update to match the format of the other capital facility elements, such as the transportation and the capital facilities and utilities elements. The new reorganization locates each subsection of the PRE into the topical order. So instead of having a section based on demand for all types of parks, trails, and open space, and then a separate section about filling the need for all of those different facilities, the proposed element reorganizes each section by topic. So for parks, you can refer to one section to understand the demand and the need and the goals and policies related to park properties. And then the next section is about trails and then open space, preserves, and so on. So each goal has its own section in the park element, and the narrative description explains more about why the goal and objectives are important and how the Parks Division will implement those policies. And lastly, we'll open up for discussion and questions, and I'll be very interested to hear if you have any suggestions or feedback that I should incorporate before the October hearings. So first, for background information, as you're very familiar by now, the PRE is planning for 20-year population growth, and a lot of supporting studies and planning coordination has been completed over the past few years to prepare for this update. For parks, that has also included participation in the active transportation and light rail planning efforts, and an update to our park and recreation visioning plan, which is the public outreach process that informs the park element update. There are some specific GMA requirements that must be incorporated into the PRE. This element must work in conjunction with the capital facilities and utilities element and sets the basis for the county's capital improvement plan and 6-year budgets as it relates to parks. The update is centered on public engagement so that the Parks Division can anticipate and respond to the needs of the capital improvements, acquisitions, and ongoing maintenance that are determined as being needed. The PRE also aligns with the Park Division's priorities with the countywide and multi-county planning policies to update the goals, objectives, and policies. RCW also requires that the Parks and Recreation element include an estimate of park and recreation demand for at least a 10-year period, an evaluation of facilities and service needs, and an evaluation of intergovernmental coordination opportunities to provide regional approaches for meeting parks and rec demand. So moving on to the proposed amendments. The changes proposed in the PRE were developed based on PSRC's Vision 2050 and the regional MVPs, the revised countywide planning policies, initial growth targets, public input, the comp plan's vision statement, the park divisions and the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources mission and visions, and the reorganization for consistency with the capital facilities element. So these are the key changes in the PRE that I will go over briefly. As I mentioned, since the 2015 update, the park element has reorganized the format of the goals and integrated new policies and objectives. The structure of the document uses the goals to lead the explanatory narrative through its contextual subjects. So readers can focus on the topic that they're most interested in researching and find all the relevant information about that topic in its section. The discussion starts with a larger picture of what the park system includes. Who are we? And it describes what is critically important to the foundation of the county's parks and rec system. Then the focus narrows down to a discussion of what do we do? These sections describe the existing conditions, demand and need, and actions for each of the key focus areas of the parks and recreation system. The foundational topics include parks, regional trails, open space and natural areas, recreation programs, and cultural and historic resources. The narrative and goals then move on to describe how we do it by explaining the goals that focus on implementation methodology. This includes an examination of the level of service calculations, acquisition priorities, and sustainable operations initiatives. And lastly, the element concludes with an implementation matrix that includes a list of projects and programs that will form the basis of CIP and budgetary decisions in future planning years. This chart shows a summary of the current level of service parks provides. We report on these numbers every year to the Planning Commission as part of our CIP and annual statement of assessment. Parks currently provides an accounting of active and passive recreation facilities, waterfront property, campsites, parking spaces, and regional trail miles to meet future growth. Parks is currently meeting and exceeding the minimum requirements for each of these measures. This chart shows the proposed updates to the minimum level of service standards and estimates the number of parks and rec facilities that will be needed to meet demand in 2044. And this also incorporates changes to the level of service methodology, such as removing waterfront miles as a level of service metric, adding urban open space preserve acres as a new metric, and allowing all park properties, including special use and open space preserve properties, to qualify as necessary to support development and therefore allow any type of park classification to feature the facilities that are required to meet these minimum standards. Another key change in the PRE is that the narrative includes a discussion of how parks funding typically works, which is through grant funding, revenues generated through park fees, real estate excise taxes, mitigation funding, general funds, and donations. Looking to the future, the Parks Division needs to consider additional diverse and innovative funding approaches. Some examples of strategies that will likely be pursued include a voter-supported bond or levy, endowment funding, or a community foundation model, such as a Snohomish County Parks Foundation. Potentially, there might be a need to implement a park district, maybe even in the urban core sub-area. And we plan to investigate the feasibility of updating the park impact fee collection codes so that mitigation fees may apply to commercial development as well as residential development. And there's a potential to utilize transportation impact fees to fund regional trail development. Strategic park planning priorities are integrated throughout the element and focus on equity, regional trails, climate change adaptation and resiliency, and providing the passive and active recreation facilities that are in highest demand by the community. This park element update retains the same core emphasis on providing regional park facilities within the context of a healthy environment and supporting growth within the urban growth areas. As I mentioned, the update strategically coincides with Parks' recent public outreach process in our visioning plan, which led to 5 thematic focus areas that were refined into these guiding principles. The guiding principles form the foundation of Parks work for at least the next 6 years and include similar themes to the regional and department-wide priorities. So I thought I'd go through those real quick here. We're striving to provide more equitable service and access to parks, trails, and open space, steward parks and natural open space, preserve assets in the context of the county's larger environmental and conservation priorities, make improvements to existing parks that meet identified needs while also incorporating climate change resilient design, connecting communities and recreation amenities with a fully built out regional trails network, and streamlining the park system, creating efficiencies in managing county properties that provide these important community benefits. All right, but notes about public participation. The public outreach has been ongoing throughout the comp plan update process, but these specific periods provide additional emphasis on collecting comments. Excuse me. In 2020 and 2021, the Parks and Rec Visioning Plan did public outreach surveys and gathered input from community groups, partner organizations, and park staff. Parks participated in the SEPA scoping in 2021 through early 2022. The draft policies were available for 30-day public comment period this February. We presented at the Park Advisory Board in April, and this Planning Commission briefing will be available online. I haven't talked this much in a while. Okay, almost done here. From the beginning of the PRE update process, it has been critical for our park staff to start the update with a visioning exercise. So the WAC here actually says that parks should engage the public in the process of identifying needs, evaluating their satisfaction with existing recreational opportunities, and developing goals to guide the development of the Parks and Rec element. Here's a quick view of the outreach summary from the PRVP, which is available on our Parks Planning website, but about 1,800 people completed the survey, and I'll just touch on a couple of the charts here. The survey asked folks to rank the types of park sites according to where they would like parks to focus our resources. And the rankings prioritize trails, then conservation and wildlife areas, then leisure facilities such as picnicking and playgrounds. We received comments such as these that focus on habitat corridors and urban growth areas, and inclusive design for parks that provide universal access. When the survey asked to rank park site management priorities, respondents favored priorities that maintain existing parks, acquire open space and natural areas for conservation and trails, and address climate change. Some of the comments that focused the priorities were on cycling paths and mountain bike trails, wildlife viewing and environmental education, and emphasizing the special assets of the Puget Sound through beaches and waterfront access. The comp plan policy public comment period in February included comments from residents, local agencies, partner organizations, and tribes. The comments generally showed particular support for the equity, climate change, and regional trail policies. Other comments requested further emphasis on hiking trails and park design and protecting habitat wildlife areas in all parks. The comment period also included specific additional requests for safe trails and sidewalk access to parks, additional playgrounds, walking trails, and outdoor community gathering spaces, more thorough implementation measures to make the new policies more enforceable, and consulting with tribes on park development, including integration of cultural information appropriately into interpretive signage, increasing park stewardship education, developing recreation amenities in clusters to minimize impact to wildlife and cultural resources, and continue using native plants and protecting mature trees. Okay. The policy table. As I mentioned in the introduction, excuse me, the policy table for the parks element includes all of the goals, policies, and objectives. Because each section has changed slightly and the reformat moved many policy and goals around, I'll briefly highlight the key changes proposed in the policy table. In the first goal, we've included the word equitable to formalize that the park and recreation system should be provided in the most equitable, effective, and efficient way possible. The new objective 1A says we will collaborate to promote equitable access, especially to marginalized communities, and this came straight from the CPPs. New policies under this objective specify that equitable park access includes providing parks, trails, and open space within walking distance of urban residents. It also explains diverse public outreach priorities and input on park development, multicultural gathering spaces, and utilizing recommendations from the park board to implement these systemic improvements. The second objective and policies just bump down a level and focus on coordination across jurisdictional boundaries to provide recreation opportunities. Goal 2 focuses on parks. Goal 3, the old goal 3 was about level of service, but it got moved down to the later section of the PRE to fit in with the other implementation goals. So the new goal 3 is all about regional trails, and this is the only new goal in the PRE. Regional trails used to be nested within the rest of the types of park properties that we provide, but we decided that they actually need a section all to themselves. Regional trails perform a different purpose and often serve different needs for the community. They're also can be very expensive to implement, but make a huge difference to the countywide and regional communities. Objectives within this goal focus on maintaining and improving existing trails, building out proposed trails, and building a cohesive and connected regional trail system. Goal 4 is a focus on open space. It incorporates new objectives and policies that meet the CPPs and MPP requirements that came from the Regional Open Space Conservation Plan, the Regional Open Space Conservation Plan. Goal 5 is about recreation programs. Recreation programs are not a primary service that county parks currently provides. The focus at parks is more about providing the facilities and then letting nonprofits and local community groups provide the recreational programming that fits well within those facilities. Goal 6 is about preserving cultural and historic resources. Goal 7 moved that LOS section down, and you can see here that I circled where we've added urban open space as an LOS measure, and that we've made the addition to say that park facilities can be located in all types of park properties. Goal 8 focuses on acquisition and development priorities. And Goal 9 says the division promotes sustainability by considering financial, environmental, and social aspects of operating the park system. Within this goal, we have the climate change objective, which touches on resilience and adaptation in parks. There's also an emphasis on meeting the county's stormwater NPDES permit requirements and the Sustainable Operations and Action Plan, which must be implemented at county-owned properties. The environmental sustainability policies also include considerations for protecting and restoring stormwater and habitat functionality at parks. So last section here, for the last section, I wanted to give a brief overview of the reorganized PRE narrative, which is the primary reason that the element is proposed as a repeal and replace type of amendment instead of a review of the strike through and underline changes. If you had a chance to review the narrative provided with the staff report, you would have seen this description that explains how the blue text has been moved around from the 2015 PRE, but is essentially the same content, while the black text is new information for the 2024 update. You might also have noticed that the narrative text is pretty long at about 100 pages. The breakdown on how many pages is devoted to explaining each goal gives some insight into the complexities and focus areas of the parks element. So briefly, I thought I'd highlight that the introduction and the who we are sections are about 20% of the document. What we do sections are about 50% of the document, and how we do it is about 30% of the document. For all the capital property asset sections, the parks, trails, and open space discussion portions, the document lays out each section similarly to include an introduction, existing conditions, demand and need, and then a list of the goals, objectives, and policies. And then lastly, when I briefed the Planning Commission in summer 2021 about the PRE, I laid out the following planning considerations. And I'm happy to be here today to present our draft element, which has carefully considered and addressed these complex and interdepartmental issues that require balance and critical choices to meet the needs of our growing county. So with that, I would be happy to open it up to discussion and questions.
Thank you very much, Carol. Any questions for Carol while we have her? I'd hand you a throat lozenge if I were close.
I know, my gosh. Well, and I forgot to mention that the Parks Director, Sharon Swan, and our Capital Planning Manager, Rich Patton, are also on the call tonight. So I don't know if they want to say anything else or add anything, or if you guys have any questions for them too. Just want to let you know that they are here.
Okay. Commissioner Sheldon, did you have a question?
Sure. Is the advisory board higher than we are? Do we have to communicate with them, or they tell us where they want to go?
The Park Advisory Board, Sharon, correct me if I'm wrong, informs park staff, and so we keep them updated, but they're not really a formal part of the comp plan update process.
Okay, one more question. I worry about, because if we went with the data and the natural resources, you guys all communicate, correct?
Yeah.
I worry if we do so many parks, or do you take a valuation of animals and everything else? Are we forcing them up into the mountains too far? So we'll never see them? I guess that's just the one easy question I had.
Are you asking about the balance between recreation
Yes.
and
Yes.
conservation? Yeah,
Yes.
it's a great question. It's something that we're definitely working towards. Sharon, do you have anything to answer Commissioner Sheldon's question about that?
And maybe just a little bit more input in when we consider like a park site and public access, we really do try to provide concentrated access and, information about where we want people to go, taking into consideration things like wetlands and buffers and areas that we would want to have protected. Typically, we find if we provide pathways for folks that they will follow those. If we don't provide information about where people should go, then we can end up with a situation where there's more kind of haphazard access on a site. And generally speaking, that's, tends to have more of an impact, from what I've seen anyway, on wildlife and just kind of like the natural environment in general.
Like the problem that King County has with all the bears on the east side towns, do we foresee that happening, or is it happening now?
Not something that I've been hearing about, but yeah, it is a good thought. But we so far, like our rural parks and then the urban parks within the UGAs are pretty different from each other and providing different services. But we do have these rural regional parks that do highlight certain features like a longer trail system or water access point. And, that's just always, that is a great consideration. Most of our sites are already developed. And I think if we were going to develop a new regional park site at a place, I think that's definitely something that we would try to consider and work around, because we don't want to be forcing any kind of wildlife out of their, habitat.
Well, I trust you, Carol, because you didn't cough or drink any water.
Yes.
So, yes.
It's very sketchy when someone coughs.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I have to leave to go to dinner, so I hope this doesn't leave us short.
Okay, you're leaving now, Ray?
Yes.
Okay. All righty.
Thank you.
Yep,
Thank you.
Commissioner Campbell.
Well, this is a really great document. It took a while to read through it all, just to say. I'm a big supporter of parks and visit many of them throughout the county. I want to see what your thinking is about the urban open space strategy. It looks like you're having to reduce the level of service because the cost of developing another set of those facilities would be 68 acres of property. So I'm just curious how you're looking at the urban open space thing. I think it's a real big part of equity. And, a lot of the impact fees, the park impact fees, are gathered in urban areas. So I can see a challenge here, but I believe there's a nexus in the service area that you gather the fees, that those should be in those more urban areas. So you've got a lot going on here with the urban open space piece. I think it's important. Just curious your thoughts.
Yeah, thanks. The analysis in the narrative does say, we don't want to set ourselves up for immediately being deficient in the urban open space. So ideally we could, exceed our minimum level of service like we are with our other metrics right now. But what we proposed in the document is that, that there is a certain level that is the current level, and we know that we're not going to be able to just magically, acquire and create new urban open space parks. But we want to plan to do better than the option of not adding any more. So the amount that we did choose to make the proposed minimum level of service kind of meets in the middle between those of adding additional parkland so that we can continue to, conserve and create new parks in the urban areas, but it doesn't necessarily keep us to a level that we would make us be deficient right away. But with also the new metric proposed, we can acquire the additional mitigation fees that we could use to, I think, get those properties. Sharon, do you have anything else you think about that?
No, that's exactly right. When we set up our baseline level of service, we don't want to be in the hole initially. Every year we report on how we're meeting level of service, and the desire is to not be in a position where we can't meet it initially. Plus, we'll need to be able to accumulate enough funding to be able to start working on acquisitions, and that takes some time. So this is really a starting step. We can always exceed level of service, but we sure don't want to miss it.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Eileen or Sharon while they're here? I'm sorry, for Carol or Sharon.
There are some questions that Eileen too. She's still around.
Hey, I thought that I've had when we heard about the land use section, and it looks like a significant amount of growth was projected for the light rail transit area along I-5. And the thought that I had is how Parks and Recreation could become a really important element of that. So people would, and I'm glad to see in the public survey you had that trails are valuable to people, that they want to walk and think about Green Lake or places where there's water features, and some kind of a linkage along paralleling the rail with water features and trails and biking and things like that. I don't know if parks can integrate into that or pull that off, but boy, what a value you would bring with your planning backgrounds is what parks does versus what the land use element wants to do, and combine them somehow. It's a thought that maybe if we pulled it off, it'd be pretty cool, and have people really proud of being able to live there.
Yeah, that's a great comment. And stay tuned for the sub area element section, which does include the parks, analysis in that sub area more specifically than what's included in the narrative of this document. And yeah, it is an interesting challenge. We're also hoping that each of those proposed light rail stations will come with some urban open space as well, whether that is natural areas or more likely also, more paved sort of areas that are gathering spaces and amenities for the communities.
Right. That those outdoor spaces will become really valuable, and trail linkages. Any other questions or thoughts on parks?
Just to add to that, I think if you go at the North Gate, go underneath North Gate to say there's quite a nice wetland area and little trails that have been integrated there. So
yeah,
that's a kind of interesting piece that I thought I was surprised by.
Now, Tom, does that link to the rail? Is that part of where the rail platform is?
Yeah.
Okay, I've heard that I need to take that train ride, the rail ride. I'm looking forward to doing it.
Yeah, well, when you go over the pedestrian bridge over the freeway there, underneath that is a whole little park and trail system.
Okay, great.
Yeah, if
We
I
have our
might,
guidance.
yeah, if I might jump in here just to provide kind of a couple of observations. So as part of the work that we're doing with Sound Transit, and you'll recall that you received a briefing from them on their work to bring light rail to Linwood and then eventually up to Everett. Part of the station design, kind of our intention is to intentionally create space. And as Carol mentioned, that may be a combination of space, be it hardscapes, like kind of an extended plaza around part of the station, or in the form of green spaces, open space areas. But we do see that the station having the ability to create, call it a centrally located space that could become part of the public realm and create kind of the there. But you will see, as Carol mentioned, the urban core sub area coming up in a couple of months. Next month in June, and you'll begin to see how beyond that we're trying to create some investments, and some of this may be through public-private partnerships to create smaller spaces. As you noted, with the population that we're looking at accommodating in and around our light rail stations, we know that open space will be really important to the quality of life and public health. So there's an important piece there. And then just as a little side note, because there was mention of Northgate. Ironically, I was at the Northgate light rail station last night as family took advantage of the convenience of being able to drive to Northgate, park, hop on the light rail, and make our way down to the stadium station and head to the Mariners game last night. So first time that I've gotten to ride light rail from Northgate. I'm looking forward to a little over a year from now being able to make that same trip, but only starting in Linwood. It was dark, so I didn't get to see that open space feature. It was a little getting into the late afternoon. But next time I'm down there, I'll have to look for it.
It's kind of fun. It's exciting. Any other questions for Carol or Sharon while we have them here? Well, thanks, you guys. It's heartening to see this sort of work going on.
Thank you.
Valuable exercise.
You bet.
Yeah, thanks.